Hey everybody, it's Wednesday, time for Wisdom Wednesday. Had a request to do a little bit on bone health today, and so I thought I would walk us through sort of the pillars of health in relationship to bone and strength of bone, particularly for women. Although men can have osteopenia and osteoporosis, we tend to see this much more frequently in women. And so when we look at the pillars of health through the eyes of bone health, we can see that there are areas in which we can optimize our intake of nutrients and food and supplements, etc. But also, are we doing some things that may be inhibiting optimal bone health? And so we want to kind of walk through each of these and look at them in terms of what can we do if you're really sensing or have been diagnosed with severe osteopenia or early osteoporosis without necessarily going on these medications that are available today, as the medications that we have can change how the bones look on these bone density tests, but are they really building normal bone? And that's the concern that we've had for quite some time. And hopefully as time moves on and into the future, we'll have some tools that perhaps are going to be a little bit better. But for now, what I've always told patients is the two best things for bone health are the two E's, estrogen and exercise. So we'll touch upon those, of course, but let's look at what we are doing from a nutritional standpoint in terms of perhaps inhibiting some of our best bone formation and what we can do to add into it. But first of all, let me just review from a bone health standpoint what happens, because bone is basically an organ that's turning over all the time. We are taking away old bone and renewing and laying down new bone at all times. So it's very dynamic. It is not a static type of structure in the body. It's constantly turning over. And the cells that lay down bone are osteoblasts, and the cells that take away old bone are called osteoclasts. And when we get older and as we move into menopause, the osteoblast side slows down, the osteoclastic side builds up. So we're taking away more bone than we are making. And so that's why it's really important in our formative years and in our younger years to take in as much and take advantage of our movement and growth and nutrition to make sure that we build the absolute strongest bones that we can, because usually sometime in our 20s or 30s, we see that equation of building versus tearing down start to shift to a more dramatic movement toward removing old bone and taking away the bone so that it begins to thin down over time. So that's just kind of a little overview. But when we look at from a nutritional standpoint, let's look at gut health and what we're doing. And we've talked about this many, many times about optimizing gut health and making sure that we're bringing in the best optimal foods and optimal nutrition, nutrient-dense foods. But one of the things that happens with aging is that we start to sense that we have more reflux and having heartburn, and we take medications that are called proton pump inhibitors, which can then inhibit a lot of things from being absorbed, particularly calcium and even vitamin D. So that's why we really push vitamin D. And we know that K2 with that vitamin D is really the secret sauce of keeping calcium in bone and teeth rather than depositing some of this calcium in plaque in our organs and in our vasculature. So you want to try to avoid that. So limiting proton pump inhibitors, and oftentimes for years and years and years, we were putting people on these medications, omeprazole, some of these other proton pump inhibitors that are out there, and we didn't realize, but it is definitely contributing to bone loss. And so this is not something you want to stay on for a long period of time. The main thing with that is understanding gut health and recognizing that we are ingesting a lot of foods that we just are not breaking down well. It's not that we create too much acid, it's generally that we don't have enough acid, and so therefore food stays in our stomach longer, and if the stomach contracts, it's just going to go back up that esophagus and cause burning. And so eating in a way that inhibits the ability of the acid to really do its job is problematic. So you want to increase with digestive enzymes and avoid foods that are problematic. Generally, the proteins that we have a hard time breaking down as we age are going to be your wheat, dairy, and of course we know that some of the other things, the other more common things are eggs, corn, soy, peanuts. These are problematic foods. And you may have others. Fats may be a real issue for a lot of folks in there. They've either had their gallbladder removed, they don't have enough lipase, and so that's where digestive enzymes with ox bile and lipases, as well as proteases to break down proteins, can be very beneficial. And even one of the products that I take, if I ever have an issue, has a little bit of hydrochloric acid in it as well. So if you can tolerate those, if you need them. Fortunately, I don't have a lot of reflux, but on occasion I will keep these types of enzymes in my purse just to have available should I have an issue. And so that can be helpful. If you have any questions about that, please let us know. So understanding too that there are other drugs out there. If you're on steroids for a long period of time, that can definitely have a negative impact on bone health and can increase bone loss and decrease bone formation. People who are on aromatase inhibitors, these can be problematic for bone health as well. So it's really important to know, are you taking something that is a problem for bone health? And understanding that those, if they can be limited, are very good. And of course, certainly when we get to the hormonal part, we'll talk about estrogen as well. So just from a nutritional standpoint, the things that you might want to consider as far as taking, we know that generally we tend to have a lot of total body calcium. So having that D3 and K2 is very beneficial. Having some magnesium, other minerals, strontium are also very helpful. If you're going to take a calcium, there's a calcium called calcium hydroxyapatite, that's APATITE, is a good form because it's optimally absorbed and then utilized within the bone as well. So those types of supplements can be very helpful. And eating a non-inflammatory diet. Inflammatory foods, any type of thing that's going to cause inflammation, is always going to slow down bone formation and contribute to bone loss. Now, exercise. So, as again I said, estrogen and exercise are the big ones. Exercise, weight-bearing exercise, getting on a vibration plate, getting your 150 minutes per week of movement, whether certainly weight-bearing with walking or running can be very helpful. You can get some benefit from other forms of exercise, like being on an elliptical or a bike, just by getting your muscles toned. But really it's that just pounding the pavement that can be so beneficial. We know that sleep, people who don't sleep well, they've done some studies with sleeping, and they've looked at questionnaires from over 11,000 people, women in particular, and those women who slept less than 5 hours had significantly more issues with bone loss. So there is something about getting adequate sleep. And so from that pillar, we've done nutrition, exercise, sleep, then stress management. There's also been interesting studies that show that people with high cortisol, because it is associated with much more inflammation, will have less bone density and more bone loss. So even controlling stress has an impact on your overall bone health. And then of course, lastly, estrogen. It's really a combination of all things, but estrogen slows down osteoclastic activity. So it's going to work on the side of bone that is the removal of bone. And so when you are able to use that, and then you add progesterone and testosterone, which work on the osteoblastic side of the equation, you then are now building healthy, normal bone. It's thought that the bisphosphonates and the medications that are used now to treat osteoporosis really just work on that osteoclastic side. And if you're not building more bone on the other end, you do not build you don't have normal healthy bone. And so a lot of these medications are limited in terms of length of time that you can stay on them, because we've seen femur fractures and jaw fractures and different things that occur. So these are not ideal. Obviously, ideally, we'd like to have a good, strong, healthy bone formation in our youth, and then try to eliminate all the negative aspects of things that can then decrease bones as we age. And then being on an optimal hormone program and being active are going to preserve bone and keep us well into our 80s and 90s. And of course, we've talked about muscle around those bones and the just metabolic currency that it gives us. And having a better muscular structure is also going to contribute to healthier bones, because they're going to just have the ability to keep those bones in great shape, plus just keeping our ability to maintain core strength and keeping balance is important with aging, so that we don't fall and we don't break bones. Hopefully that's given you some insight and some information. You all have a great week. If you have any concerns or questions for us, please let us know, and we'll talk again next week.